Hello, and welcome to our second April webinar focusing on formative and summative assessments and assessment best practices. I'm Megan Endicott, your Georgia Department of Education community lead and lead for the community forum and moderator for General Music K through 8. Today, we're going to review assessment types and spotlight formative and summative assessments in regard to their definition, how and why we use formative and summative assessments in your classroom, any alternative or different forms of formative assessments, such as formal and informal, and specific examples of their uses in your classroom. Finally, we're going to talk about best practices for using data from these assessments and how to best offer feedback for students. We will end with a quick tie into those Georgia Department of Education resources as well as some teacher keys to offer tips and tricks to ensure that you are hitting that proficient mark. So let's dig in and let's get started. To start us off, we're going to take a minute and recap some of the things we talked about with assessments in the last webinar. In the last webinar, we talked about all the overarching ideas with the assessment types, and we spotlighted diagnostic assessments. So let's just kind of take a peek at that. Diagnostic assessments are those moments where the teacher will ask the questions of the student at the very beginning of a unit, even prior to the unit, to check for understanding of those concepts. So we think about those happening again before instruction starts, or maybe even right at the very beginning of a unit, worst case scenario, to see what the kids already know before we start the learning. So we know that those can be written assessments, online assessment submissions. Of course, with our current realities, we know that we have a little bit of a blend, performance tasks, and those quick informal checks. A sneak peek here at formative assessments. These are different from summative assessments, and they're meant to be those quick checks that we use just to inform the students of what they know as they're going through the process. We're not looking at things in that deep dive. We're looking at things to see just, what is it that we know in the moment, and are there any misconceptions and things of that nature. And it really helps us decide then, what are we going to be teaching day to day? What do my kids know? Each of my students really know. This is incredible way of testing our students. We do it all the time. We also offer quick feedback to our students. So let's look at some of the formative assessments. Again, we're going to deep dive into those today. These can be things like journaling and sorting and short answers, extended answer responses, multiple choice questions, any of those performance tasks that we do, those really quick ones, play this for me, sing this for me, show me steady beat. All of those things fall in those formal assessments if we're doing maybe a checklist to fully document. And then informal assessments would be things like peer observations, self-assessments, reflections, movements. Show me if it's high by waving your scarf high. Show me if it's low by waving your scarf low. Teacher observations, seeing those things in action, and then those quick performance tasks. And then finally, we have our summative assessments. These are the formal assessments that reflect all of the students' understanding across several lessons. This ideally would happen at the end of a unit. So we would be working on those formative checks along the way to make sure that they are successful by the time they get to that summative assessment. These are supposed to be meaningful, tied to the standard, and really demonstrate, did the student master the concept or the standard that they were learning. So let's look at some of these examples. These are our written assessments, projects, compositions, performance-based tasks, and conferencing. I bet you didn't think about using conferencing for summative assessments. Anytime that you can meet with a student and really talk to them about their understanding actually is a valid way of collecting information on whether or not they mastered a concept. Too often I feel that we give them a test that maybe doesn't really reach the student in a way that matches their learning style, and we get an inaccurate view of what do they really know. And so having these conferencing moments give the students an opportunity to talk with you, and you talk with them and really dig into the understanding and see exactly where they fit on with that standard. So conferencing, please don't forget about the power of conferencing. It might be one or two kids that you just see, why are they getting it? And then when you talk to them for a little second, you're like, oh, they do get it. They just couldn't write it down, or they couldn't articulate what they meant or what they were trying to say in that particular assessment in the way that I asked them. So don't forget about the power of conferencing. So we know we should be including 3 types of assessments throughout our units of study with our students. This requires careful thought and planning in the process and should be included almost before you craft your lesson plans. Honestly, I feel that starting with, we talk about backwards design, we start with the end in mind, but also the assessment pieces should be kind of part of that beginning phase. And then we plug in those activities where we're making things a little more fun and exciting. And how are we going to lead up to this way that we're going to actually check for understanding? So I use an activity plan. So an activity plan is a great structure to utilize when creating those assessment types to ensure a variety and to define how you'll progress through the unit. In addition, these can be used as the structure to then fill in those lesson plan activities to support what the students should know throughout the unit and by the end of the unit. So I took this graduate class back in when I was getting my master's, and it was on assessments and data measurement. And I can say that as a music teacher, I was kind of scared when I took this class because I'm a lone wolf in my own little island trying to do my own thing. And I was trying to think, how do I actually effectively do this in a way that's going to benefit me and my students, but also truly measure what it is that they know and really test to the standard? And one of the biggest eye-opening things that I could have been exposed to was this class and this process of creating an activity plan. So I understand now how to effectively track and measure student work, and that is a big task, especially when we don't have a PLC right in our own school to bounce off ideas. And generally, we try to have a PLC within our own district, but that doesn't always seem to be effective when time and distance, right? That's huge. That's why I think that this community platform is a fantastic place for us to have these conversations. And I really, really challenge us to dig into this space so that we can share ideas and really build up this community. So in this discussion post, I really hope to share some of these activity plans, share the entire activity plan, and maybe get some ideas on what you think maybe will work for you and maybe some things that you would try differently. Or maybe what is it that you do in your classroom with your students? Do you have an activity plan? Do you have a backwards design plan that you use? What is it that you use in your classroom that's been successful? And that's going to be our big focus. So in our examples today, I'm going to try to tie everything into this 5th grade melody unit example and how I organize my assessments to drive my instruction. Now, one thing you might notice in this activity plan, you're going to see about midway down, right about here, that of course this is a 6-week unit of study, so there's 6 lessons in this cycle. We know that we generally have 9 weeks in our lessons. So I, on purpose, has built in some time so that there's some flexibility in my planning. So we never know when we're going to need to pause and redirect students. And we never know when those misconceptions are going to form. And we're going to need time for remediation oftentimes. So you want to build in, I kind of want to underplan in some of those cases because, the lesson plan piece is really going to support that. Those moments where you're getting some formative assessments turned in, or maybe even informal assessments, you're going to need to build in some time to really help your students learn things. So a 6 weeks plan is good, and you can see here I broke it out a little bit by activity, and these activities are tied to different assessments. Now, the other thing in our activity plan to consider is how you're going to collect your data. This is important for each of your activities, and there's a few ways to mark them on your plans. So you'll notice here we've got recorded. There's also not recorded, and this would be when, did you write any data down that was collected? You would almost always record your data in some way, whether it is in-class data or just impressions that were informally gathered, or maybe individual student data on a student responses or involvement with the content. So you're going to notice on almost everything that is listed on my activity plan, it's probably going to say recorded, unless it's a general observation. But even still, when we're making these general observations, we're generally recording, did the class get it? Did the class not get it? And how am I going to move forward? And a lot of times, the more you teach, the more years you have under your belt, you're just going to start making those changes naturally. You're going to see, oh, they don't get it. So I'm going to quickly change my instruction to fix that. That's the formative assessment that we're going to talk about today. Then you're going to see things that say graded or not graded. You don't always have to give students activities that need to be graded. But remember that all activities, regardless, need feedback. So students need to know how they performed when interacting with the activity, whether it's a quick verbal acknowledgement or a whole class discussion. It might be, Susie, yes, you got it. You were the first one. You were waving your flag high, and it showed me that you knew high notes. Or you might have a full class discussion. I noticed the whole class was really understanding. Everybody was waving their flags up high, and when we got low, we all jumped down low. I think that we've done a good job of understanding. We're going to move to the next level. These are important moments that you need to have with your students so that when they leave class, they say, you know what? I know high and low, for example, because I did the activity and my teacher told me that I know what I'm doing. Okay, and I think that those are moments that we need to make sure we take advantage of. We also have reported and not reported. So this is a little different than recorded. Recorded is just for your own tracking and your own measurement and your own data collection, just for you, the teacher. But reported and not reported is more of the activity that officially counts to their final grade. So we're consistently assessing students to inform our instruction and to offer student feedback and let them know if they're meeting or not meeting a standard. But in general, we know that we have to have 9 grades per semester for students. So this particular concept of reporting your grades and marking in here will help you track per unit. Did I meet my quota of at least 9 recorded grades per semester for my students? So the activity plan is a great way for you to track and organize yourself. I highly recommend it. It really doesn't take much time, and you can toss it right in there with your lesson plan, and it's really going to beef up your TEAC score, which is something we're going to get to here at the end. So let's do a deep dive into formative assessments. So we're really gonna dig, and we're gonna see what are formative assessments, the definition. We're gonna talk about why we need to use them, and then I'm gonna give you some examples of ways I've used them with this particular unit, and then I'm gonna show you an alternative versions from a colleague of mine. So let's look at what are formative assessments. Formative assessments refer to the wide variety of methods that teachers use to conduct in-process evaluations of student comprehension, learning needs, and academic progress during a lesson, unit, or course. So in other words, formative assessments are for learning, while summative assessments are of learning. We want to make sure that we're living live in the moment with our formative assessments to ensure that we are getting some information from the students and we're giving information back to the students. It's a very cyclical process, and it's also helping us with deciding, what am I doing next? Am I moving on? Do I need to repeat something? Is it just a few students? Is it the whole students? Formative assessments are the key. And I will tell you, if you do it right, all of your students, by the time they get to their summative assessments, should be passing and meeting that standard or mastering that standard, because along the way you've been checking their progress and helping those individuals catch them up. Okay, so let's look at the why we use formative assessments. We use it to monitor student learning. We use it to provide ongoing feedback to improve the teaching and the student learning. So it's not just about, do the kids know it, but also, is my instruction actually reaching the students, or do I need to alter or modify something I'm doing? Assist the students in identifying strengths and weaknesses and target areas that need work. So this is helping us really hone in on who knows what and who doesn't know what, so we can differentiate our instruction. It's there to help assist teachers recognize student struggles and address them immediately. So we might find all of a sudden that maybe the students kind of understand pentatonic scale, for example, but maybe they don't understand truly what it means to have that step and skip, right? We're going to skip past fa. And why is that? And what is the significance there? And when they're talking with their peers, you notice there's a misconception or they're struggling with this. By having these formative checks, we can really check on those things and we can identify it, we can nip it right away. So let's look at the two types of formative assessments. We have formal assessments and we have informal assessments. Let's take a peek at some examples of informal assessments. You're going to see here a whole bunch of examples. But what I want to talk about with you are some of my favorites. Think, Pair, and Share, definitely a favorite of mine. This is an opportunity for students to really get to know what it is that, I guess really dig deeper with a knowledgeable other, right? So they're talking to someone else, they're sharing their ideas, and the other student, the partner, is sharing their ideas. Maybe they agree, maybe they disagree, but they're having some meaningful discussions. How often are we having class? And there's that one kid that's always, and they answer all the questions, right? Johnny, yes. Johnny, yes. Well, I know Johnny knows all the answers, but I have no idea if Susie knows all the answers because Johnny keeps answering all of the questions. When you have a Think, Pair, and Share, you actually can walk around and monitor and listen to the students and hear all students have a voice. And to me, that is powerful. Don't forget the power of a Think, Pair, and Share. Also remember with informal assessments, it can be something very quick. It could be I'm having them perform a movement, whether it's a form, you're demonstrating form, you're demonstrating a high and low, any things like that, you really can use that. Having students work on whiteboards, flip them around and show you an answer can give you a quick check. It's not something that you necessarily need to do a full individual child check, but you might look at it and think, okay, I've got a good sense of where my kids are and how I can move forward. So that's the purpose of informal formative assessments. And honestly, music teachers do it probably the best, and we use it every single music class. So don't discount what you're doing with informal formative assessments, and don't forget to document and say that you're doing that, and this is how you know what your students know. Be your own advocate in your classroom. So let's look at some informal formative assessments. I thought it'd be fun to show a few varying ways to quickly and formally assess students through lesson activities in the class. And these are things that I use consistently and probably some things that you too use. Finding ways for students to lead the class to demonstrate knowledge while other students are being assessed, engaging in the content, is an example of informal assessment that you see on the top left here picture. You'll see that young lady is standing inside of the hula hoops. Each hoop has a different rhythm notation inside, and the students are playing the rhythm as the backtrack as she's jumping from hoop to hoop. Finding ways for students to work collaboratively to solve a mystery or a given prompt makes learning fun, of course, and opens the opportunity for students to have a voice in the learning. And you can hear and easily assess students' progress by walking around the room during these moments or nuances. And of course, it ends with a final product. You can see the collaboration happening on the top right corner of this photo here as students are listening and singing to Cobbler, Cobbler, and they're deciding how many sounds per beat that they hear, and they're placing shoes on the beat to demonstrate their understanding, right? So one shoe, one beat, two shoes, or two sounds on a beat, and then they had to place the appropriate rhythmic notation on each beat, as you can see right here in this grid in the bottom left corner. So as the teacher, you're able to travel the room and you're able to listen to students, brainstorm, and offer quick feedback as needed to guide the students. In addition, valuable feedback is collected for you as the teacher to make decisions on where students need that additional support or if they're ready to move to that next task. Now, on the next slide, you're going to see a quick video of some Think, Pair, and Share. And you heard me talk about how much I love the concept of Think, Pair, and Share. So here are several different ways that I've utilized different technology tools in my classroom, and just manipulatives on my board to have the students really dig deeper into the thought, dig into the concept or the standard, while I'm able to travel around the room, usually making a video, to see what the kids know and what they don't know. While these tools may or may not be tools that you have access to, they think about the possibilities and the ways that you too can use all sorts of resources to have students collaborate and work together.
It's the yellow one. No, the orange one is
It always like goes like back and forth basically. So it's weak. Yeah, so maybe like strong, weak, strong, weak.
But yeah, but it's just strong.
Yeah, strong, weak, and let's see. Check it.
Dynamics. Actually, we need 14. Endicott. Do we have to do
So here are a few examples of formal formative assessments. Things like portfolios or journals, anytime where the kids can really collect maybe a series of different artifacts that they've been working on throughout the unit, including questions that have multiple choice, something simple, right? Constructive responses, extended responses, exit tickets, huge way to do a quick formal formative assessment. In fact, probably one of my favorite ways. We can make those a little more paper pencil, or you can make them a little more casual, where they're high-fiving something on the way out, but really still being able to collect individual data on the students. Checklists are amazing for quick formal formative assessments. Rubrics help guide students in specific what is it you're looking for. Performance tasks. I need you to play this before, during class today, and I'm going to watch you play them, and you do a quick little check on your checklist. Did they get it? Did they not get it? Who still needs work? These are all really great ways for you to do quick, formal, formative assessments. We're going to look at a few traditional formal formative assessments. And the first one, again, is tied to my activity plan for my 5th grade Melody unit. So here's a specific example of formal formative assessments. It includes a variety of assessment question types to ensure it meets the needs of all the learners. And while this assessment is on the longer side in nature, consider taking an assessment like this and then breaking it all up by learning concept or objective. So you can easily have students complete portions of this assignment at the end of class following a discussion. Let's take an example here. Maybe on a day that you spent some time learning and reviewing solfege pitches on the staff with students, you might just pull the matching portion of this formative assessment and give it to students for a quick 4-question ticket out the door. So I'm going to move my face here for just a second, and you're going to see right here, this would be something that maybe you could just break up, and you're going to chunk it, and you say, you know what, today you guys have learned this, so this is the portion I want you to give me on the way out. Still making sure you're assessing the students. It's still tied to the standard. It's still part of your formative check, but we just chunked it. And I think that it's important for us as music teachers to remember we shouldn't be spending all of our time just sitting at a piece of paper just assessing students. Finding ways to really chunk it up and still get the information you need, definitely not a bad idea. Not a bad idea at all. You might also think, okay, the following week we're going to work on having the students label their own pitches on the staff with whiteboards and group. And then you might have another ticket out the door where they do a completion and they fill in the blank with these 4 questions for their ticket out the door. Of course, for a quick ticket out the door, this probably wouldn't be too quick. You might narrow it down to 2 and still get what you need. Or you could give them a little more time and give them 4. You might give them 2 of these with friends and then 2 of them alone to scaffold. So all ways to break down this assessment that I've built, all intentionally. Again, when you get the activity plan, you'll see those intentions. And actually at the end, we're going to dig into what that looks like. So breaking up these big assessments, very good idea, but making sure that you plan with purpose. It's okay to put them all together to get a sense of those item types while you're building it and to visually ensure you're capturing all the parts of the standard in your assessment. But then maybe consider breaking them up so that the students aren't just thinking, right? We want to make learning exciting and fun. We only see them once a week for 45 minutes, but we definitely need to get these assessments in. So be creative in how you do it, and that's my suggestion for you. So here's a differing example of a formative assessment shared with me by my colleague, Miss Susan Ahmad, just to offer a little variety in my presentation. I feel like you guys have heard from me all year, or this at least for these last couple of webinars, and I just thought I'd toss in a little variety. So I reached out. I phoned a friend, if you will. So here you can see that Susan has the standard she's assessing listed at the top of the page along with a rubric. And it's pretty neat to consider adding the rubric onto the actual assessment, because now not only can the teacher really quickly assess because you can peek at that assessment every time you're doing a quick grade, but students can see what the expectation is very clearly. It's listed out. Rubrics are brilliant. I know it can be overwhelming for students, so I always teach the students, hey, just look at the perfect column because you could pretty much live there as long as you follow those guidelines, and generally they seem to do just fine with that. But I know rubrics can be overwhelming. Checklists are also a good option. But when you're playing a performance task, rubrics is definitely the way to go. So those are some specific examples of use in Susan's classroom for formative assessments, and here's the second page. So still continuation of what she started before. Now, of course, we can't forget about the valuable resources available for you at the Georgia DOE. And we know they're ready available resources to all music teachers. Here's an example of an assessment that can be found given to students in first grade covering expression. So a quick formative assessment to give students a chance to kind of interact with the content in a different way, but also give you feedback on how are they tying this to their environment, okay, which is also one of the standards. You'll see the standards are listed here at the bottom for reference. Again, all of this can be found on the Georgia DOE website. At the very end of our webinar, I'll show you how to get there. Now let's take a peek at summative assessments. And again, with summative assessments, we're going to talk about the definition. We'll get into its why do we use them, and we'll talk about alternative or different forms, and then specific examples in my classroom. I found quotes for both the summative and formative assessments because I think sometimes bringing it to life like this with these specific documented definitions really makes it a little more concrete. So for summative assessments, the goal of a summative assessment is to evaluate student learning at the end of an instructional unit by comparing it against some standard or benchmark. Summative assessments are often high stakes, which means that they have a high point value. Examples of summative assessments include a midterm exam or a final product. Now, I know we don't do midterm exams in our classrooms, but we certainly do end of unit exams, and we do just end of learning, right? We have a standard. We need to see if they master it. So those things are definitely happening in our classrooms. Let's look at some reasons why we need to use summative assessments. Well, we use summative assessments to evaluate student learning at the end of a unit, comparing it against the standard or benchmark. We use them to measure progress toward improvement goals. So if we see the students at the very beginning, they take their diagnostic assessment, we've tracked their information, we've got their data, and now they've completed their summative. Part of what we're looking for is the growth. Did they grow? Not every student, we want every student to master. But the reality is there's going to be at least 10% that doesn't master. So what we then need to think about in our brain is, okay, did they show improvement? Did they go above where they started? Because that should be celebrated for the student as well. Hey, you know what? Maybe you didn't pass it this time, but look how much you grew. And we can still use that information, of course, to guide instruction for later courses. We know music specifically builds on each other, and it's important to have the foundational information. So making sure that you know what that kid did not master is going to help you. You're going to have to bring it back in the next unit. It's just going to look a little different, and that's going to help you continuously reinforce those concepts so the students are successful, especially when they're moving to middle school. What if that ends up being, the next big famous percussionist in the symphony orchestra, right? Wouldn't you feel amazing that you just kept pushing and trying? Never know. We also use them to guide teachers to improve their teaching methods. So I don't know how many times you really look at your assessments, but maybe you notice, oh, everybody missed number 5. Everybody missed number 5. So now you have to really evaluate, okay, 2 things could happen. Number 5 could have been a really bad question, or maybe I didn't really teach number 5 in a way that the kids really understood. So it really brings up some great questions, looking at those summative assessments and digging into and disaggregating the information that's coming your way. Don't forget to look at that piece, because I have found so many times I thought that listening example was perfection, but everybody missed it. But they got the other questions about form correct, which means I did not probably pick the right listening excerpt. So taking time to look over those things, very important. Also, we use them to improve in curriculum and the curriculum planning. We might find sequencing is off. We might think that it's okay to sequence it to teach something in such a way that you're like, okay, you know what, this sequence makes sense. But maybe you need to alter something because you realize that the kids didn't really understand the pacing in which you gave them. So keep all those things in mind. That's why using summative assessments is important. So it's not just about understanding who's mastered what, it's also looking at your instruction. So what makes an assessment summative is not the design of the test, assignment, or self-evaluation per se, but the way it's used, i.e. to determine whether and to what degree students have learned the material that they've been taught. Let's look at some summative assessment examples. So we know that we've got traditional summative assessments. We've got end-of-unit tests. These are comprised of multiple assessment types: constructed response, selected response, open-ended response. So that's those fill in the blanks or maybe a short answer. We've got multiple choice. We've got drag and drop, the draw the lines to connect, all of those types of things that happen in a traditional summative assessment. And then we have culminating assessments, where it's a performance task, or maybe it's a PBL, project-based learning type task. I know a lot of us include things like that because it's more fun for the students than sitting and just taking a traditional test, but to be actively engaged with the process. And those could be included in digital portfolios. I say digital because it's really hard in music for being a performance task to have everything just written in a portfolio like you would in an art department. There are lots of platforms where you can store students' digital work and verbal reflections to pull together to see where they started and how they ended and really how they got there. And I think that's the most exciting part of it. Performances really show, especially when we're looking for a polished, clean performance, a great way of a culminating activity that took us from the beginning to the end. And of course, compositions. Compositions are the highest level of creating in our practice, and a great way to really show that the students have pulled together all the elements of music making to come up with a final composition. Better yet, take that composition and perform it. So here's an example of a traditional summative assessment. The summative assessment has multiple opportunities for students to share their knowledge. So whether or not they are skilled at auditory, or maybe they're skilled at multiple choice, maybe they're real excited about writing in those notes, there's an opportunity for them to really demonstrate their knowledge in many different ways. And provided you've offered similar opportunities in your formative assessments along the way, the summative assessment should be easy peasy for the student, and that's the goal. We want the summative to be easy. We want them to be successful. We also want it to be fair and realistic. So here's an example. Again, it goes with the activity plan for that lesson plan for 5th grade. And I will share that huge plan with you that has all of these elements together so you can see the thought process that went behind the planning of this. It's broken down for you. Here is another example of a summative assessment that is a composition project and performance. So the students are going to be using paper to write down a extended pentatonic melody. They're going to be composing it. They're going to be using specific rhythmic notations, and then they are going to perform it. This rubric you can see is tied to the standards, and each standard is written very carefully underneath each of the categories so that there is a clear understanding as to what they're mastering. That's also nice to see that maybe they mastered rhythmic notation, which is great. Okay, I can check that off the box. But looking at it broken down this way, maybe they weren't able to notate it on the staff correctly. So now you can pinpoint specifically what it was that they missed and really hone in and help them with that deficit and remediate versus giving them an assignment and just saying, oh, they failed. Ugh. You're really not going to pinpoint what it is they didn't do well on, so you won't know how to help them and you won't know how to fix it. So making sure you tie these standards in will really help you define more clearly what does the kids know, what do the kids not know. Here is an example from my friend Miss Susan Ahmad. She shared with me a different example of orchestral instruments. It's a summative assessment, and you see there's some mixture of auditory. There are some picture identifications. You're going to see other things throughout her assessment here as well. You're going to notice a different assessment types. And again, I think that is really important for you to see that some students respond better in other ways than other students. So having a variety built into your assessment is something you should consider. And of course, let's not forget the Georgia Department of Education still has those ready-made resources for summative assessments as well. Here is an example of a summative assessment that is a body percussion rhythm activity or creation activity that is shared on Flipgrid, and you'll see here again it's tied to the standard, so you'll know exactly what the students mastered. It might be that they mastered all of it. It might be that they only picked up on a couple of things. So this is a great resource for you. It is for virtual and unplugged students, so we have some options for you here. Now, I wanted to give you an example of a culminating project with students that shows them if they were to create a portfolio, what this digital or virtual looking portfolio would look like that could track and measure students as they are going through a process of creation with a final product. So check it out.
Okay, so this is our Frank was a monster who wanted to dance, like our very starting sheet, and we've edited from this point, but this was just the beginning. And then we have these 16th notes, which is equal to 1 beat. I mean, stop. And then we have this, which is equal to 1.5 because it's a quarter with a dot. And then we have this, which is equal to 2. And then we have this, which is equal to 1/2. And you add it all together. Yay! Plus sign. And then you get 4. And then this is just... Frank was a monster who wanted to dance. I know I could boogie if they gave me the chance. So he put on his hat and his shoes made in France and opened a jar and put ants in his pants. He drove to the theater and jumped on stage, and he danced like a shoe size instead of his age. Frank shook his shoulders, his practical stuff. The audience screamed because he couldn't stop.
So you can see that they took step by step. They were able to take what they were learning, they were able to move it and change things and alter it in a way that really worked for them. And it really provided them that self assessment piece, the reflection piece, to get a deeper understanding for that final product. Okay, so we're to our last section, the best practices using assessment data and feedback. We're going to talk about some things about differentiated instruction, what to do after we give the assessment, what do we do with the data, and of course, what assessment data influences instructional practices. And we'll end with TEAG standards number 5 and number 6. Differentiated assessments can be done by designing and providing various assessment methods and activities that are appropriate for each type of student, such that they can effectively learn and demonstrate what they have learned. Differentiated instructions can be done by, or assessments can be done by providing a variety of options and opportunities to show learning and proficiency. So we can do that through, as you can see here, some tiered activities, scaffolding your questions so that we're building it from the small to make it bigger. You can also take that and scaffold questions verbally with students who are in need. You can have flexible assignments or tasks that reach different student styles. Performance tasks, though, are probably the best way to really differentiate instruction because the product itself is varied and it offers a little choice space inside of there, and that can give students the freedom to move at a pace that's comfortable for themselves. So let's look at a few ways that I make sure I differentiate lessons or assessments to meet the needs of my students. This happens during that planning phrase. This happens during that planning phrase that I've been talking about, right? So not only do I create a planning document for the unit assessment plans, but I dig deeper into the planning for assessments for students to ensure a variety of needs are met. Of course, this can be done through DOK levels. We know about Bloom's taxonomy, and also through including a variety of assessment question types. So meaning we've got multiple choice, we've got short answer, auditory things that are built in, and ensuring you have a variety so that every student has an opportunity to show what they know. Now, this can be true with summative assessments as well. So we ensure that we're scaffolding those questions. It's very important when you're building the assessment to set students up for success. So you can see here are the standards that are being met in this summative assessment. And you can see just in the planning phase that there's a lot of time being built out when trying to figure out exactly what types of questions will be asked, making sure there's a variety of DOK levels. These DOK levels are actually really important when you're looking at the standard verbiage to see, okay, I don't need to push it too far because it's really only asking me certain things. So keeping those things in mind while you're building out your assessment. And again, I have all of this to share with you, so you can just check it out, copy, paste, alter things the way you want to alter it, take it, leave it, toss it, whatever you want to do with it. This is for you. And I will tell you, it definitely helps with TEAG scores when they see your admin team sees that you're really carefully planning out your lessons. Plus, the biggest, most important part, your students are benefiting. You're going to notice a growth in your students and their content knowledge because you've spent time really successfully planning how you're going to measure their success. It's not just kind of willy-nilly on the fly. It's not also overbearing and just too much. It seems like a lot, but once you plan it for your unit, my friends, it's kind of there, right? It's kind of there. And you just get to roll with it every year and make alterations, adjust things to make it fit for you. But generally speaking, you don't have to reinvent the wheel every year once you get through it. And actually, after you come up with a blueprint for one lesson plan or one unit plan, it also sets the pace for you to move through others very easily. You can just model them off of each other. So what happens next? Well, we record and assess the data. You want to look at it, you want to view it, you want to see things about what do my kids know, where were their successes, where were their struggles, make decisions about item types in your assessment, make decisions about your teaching instruction. You want to communicate those results. It's important you give feedback. I live in the digital world because we have so many students. It's really hard to give written feedback on everything. Some classes, I'm a big advocate of leaving a post-it note on their work with a quick little message that gives them a glow and grow. But you can't do that for every single student in every single grade every single week. So quick ways to utilize technology where you can send them a quick message that says, I like this because you did that, send, perfect, or hey, this is great, we need to work on this, this, and this, to give them that specific feedback. Very important. You can use all of that data to plan individualized instruction. So you can then target certain students. Do you need to pull them for small group? Do you need to bump them in the hall and see what's going on? Do you want to grab them at the end of class? We have to be very creative as music teachers having so many students. How are we going to meet those kids? But when you know exactly who they are, it's not so hard just to grab them real quick and say, hey, I noticed that we had a hard time with reading lines and spaces on the staff. Did you know that every good boy does fine on the line? And they'll be like, oh my gosh, I didn't remember that. Or I had no idea, teach me the things. And so you really can grab them and work with them that way. And then, of course, you can start planning your enrichment or remediation and, when need, how to reassess. So, how does assessment data influence your instructional practices? Well, for me, I use it to help me inform instruction. Where am I going next, especially with those formative assessments? I also use it to measure growth with those individual students, like I mentioned before. Group goals, individual goals, where are we? Where did we start and where did we end? Did we make some sort of progress? And we use it, of course, to compare those diagnostic and summative assessments. Now, one of the things we said we were going to talk about before we ended this webinar were TEKS performance standards and how we can find ways to support each other to make sure we're meeting that proficient mark. So we look at Standard 5, it's on assessment strategies. You can see here it's talking about diagnostic, formative, and summative assessment strategies. Well, my friends, that's all we talked about today. So I feel like we should be good at this. So if you look here at this, you're going to see things like this. Use different formats of teacher-made assessment. Now, I pulled these straight from the Georgia Department of Education Teacher Keys Effectiveness System. They have a checklist for every single standard, and you can pull these and it really will help you identify what level you may be at. Now, keep in mind, level 4 is not only is it consistent, but generally it's something that happens outside of your classroom. So how are you taking this outside your classroom to PLCs or maybe outside your building, and you're helping other people across the district. So we kind of are focusing on this level 3 zone and how we can make sure that we're meeting that need. Well, thinking about these different formats, we talked about that with that activity plan, you guys. This hopefully will set you for success when we're talking about at least developing your items in your assessment piece. But then we need to look at things like communication. We need to look at things like, how are we going to monitor how they're learning? So how are you documenting and tracking how they're being successful? I use a piece of paper. I am old school when it comes to tracking. I find that's easier for me. Everyone has a different method. I have a seating chart that is just printed. I have my kids, well, I used to have my kids in a little horseshoe. Now I use Infinite Campus, which happens to be a platform to measure student grades. It also has little seating charts. You could probably find a seating chart anywhere because all my kids have to be spread out. But next to their names, I have a quick tracking system. Formative assessments, generally, if they don't have a full grade, if it's informal, it's some sort of a system of a check, a plus, a minus, okay, something quick where I can tell how they're doing with a code that tells me what the activity was. And then summative assessments, I can mark right on there their grade. So by their little seat, it has all the information around them, and I can tell by looking at them for that unit how they're doing. So you want to have some sort of way to track and measure. A lot of people are required to also post those inside of a platform, which helps communicate with parents. All those things, very good. So if you're already doing that, great. If you need help with that, let's use the community space to have conversations to see how we can help each other out and lean on each other for that conversation. And then, of course, the validity of the assessment. This is one of the things that I was talking about. We're looking at the assessment. How did we actually teach the content? Were they successful? Was the item type appropriate? Was it a good listening example, for example? Those are some things we'd look at here at the validity. The next TEAC standard is assessment uses. Okay, so we're talking about now taking that information and really analyzing it and looking at student progress to inform those instructional pieces. So we're looking at identify and enhance student learning. And when you're looking at it, did we return feedback, right? Feedback is important. This is where this falls in on a timely manner. Did we look at remediating or enriching students? Are we providing opportunities for them to reflect? We talked about reflection. You heard an example of my students really getting into the, why did I make these choices? Why did I make these decisions? And then maybe I changed things, but why did I change them? And how was it more aligned to the standard? All of these things are really helping the kids dig deeper and then improve instruction. So now you're looking at making instructional decisions, pedagogical decisions on the students' responses and deciding what is appropriate for them and using that for ongoing assessment and remediation and instructional practices. So when you look at something simple like a quick activity plan, you're kind of meeting a lot of these marks here. So I want you to consider looking at those and seeing what you think. And then maybe we can alter it together as a team and see what would be an amazing resource that we could all craft. That would be awesome, wouldn't it? So I hope we really use this space and the community to build this amazing resource that we can use so we can all get those 3s, maybe some 4s on those TEAC scores. All right, so let's look here at the Georgia Department of Education. This is where we find those valuable ready-made resources that I was showing you before. You go to the website here, the www.georgiadoe.org. Then you go to Learning and Curriculum. You'll find the Fine Arts space. You'll go to Remote Teaching and Learning Plans. That's the 4th step. Once there, you're going to see, of course, now it's even more full. We've got additional lesson plans loaded for you. You just click right on that lesson plan and it's going to take you to assessments, and formative, summative, diagnostic assessments are all built into these digital lesson plans, both plugged and unplugged, so it will meet all your needs. Take them, use them, or take them and use it as a guide to make or craft something that you find perfect for your students, that's just right for your students. Don't forget to utilize those resources. And of course, how to get in touch with me, we know you can find me on Twitter, Endicott Spot. Instagram, a little less used. Maybe I could step up my game. Dolphin Music. You can find me on YouTube. I try to post instructional videos for you. You can use those in your classroom. You can flip your instruction. Take what I have. What I have is yours. And of course, my blog site has a link to all things. So if you want to see more of what we've talked about today, you can go there and check it out. Don't forget to follow our fearless leaders here in the Georgia DOE Fine Arts team. We have their both Twitter handles and we have Facebook. We've got email addresses, many ways to contact and reach out to our Fine Arts team. And of course, don't forget to follow the Georgia Department of Education on all the social media sites so that you can stay in the know and you can stay connected. And please, I cannot wait to see all the things that we're going to share inside of the community. I'll see you guys there. Bye.